On a spring afternoon in 2013, an Ontario man would write a note to his mother saying he was heading to Toronto, only for him to vanish without a trace. But despite begging police to search for him, no one would. And as time would go on, some began to wonder if a serial killer could be the reason that this man with so much life in him disappeared into thin air.
No answers.
9 years ago today.
What happened to these two young children?
Remains a mystery.
Urgent story unfolding right now. Who is missing? An unsolved murder.
"47-year-old Jon Michael Riley was born on July 3rd of 1966 to his parents Noreen and Victor in Cambridge, England. He also had two sisters, one named Judy. His mother was originally from Nova Scotia, descending from a family of 8 generations of sailors from Fogo, Newfoundland. Their father was born in Quebec and worked in the copper mines as a teen. Being dirt poor, he worked his way to becoming an Athlone Fellow, the Athlone Fellowship being a 1 to 2 year postgraduate program to bring Canadian engineers to the United Kingdom for additional studies or industry experience. Victor ended up working his way to Cambridge, England to study chemical and civil engineering, eventually being on a team that invented carbon fiber. While in England, he was also captain in the Navy. One summer, his battleship would pull into port in Nova Scotia, where Noreen was studying to become a nurse. Being a social butterfly, she met Victor at a dance where her date didn't show, and the two would fall in love. Eventually along came Jon. The family would travel around a lot. When one of Jon's sisters were born, their father was a professor at a university, and the family was living in a French district in Montreal, Quebec. Their mother was working as a nurse there. However, due to the separatist movement at the time, the family ended up in northern Thailand. Their father worked there as a professor at a university, and their mother as an English teacher. And with their father's job came a house with a staff. When Noreen found out that the staff had children, she told them to bring their kids to their home, leading to the children's first language being Thai because their caregivers didn't speak English. Thai food also became their comfort food. During this time, the Vietnam War was happening, and watching the warplanes fly overhead would lead to Jon's obsession with flying. Jon and his sisters had an amazing bond, the quintessential typical big brother, described as a jokester. When the children were nearing the end of grade school, the family moved back to Canada and settled in Etobicoke, Ontario, at 26 Dunedin Drive, a middle to upper class neighborhood. There, the family had a pet goat named Jessie, and Jon attended Etobicoke Collegiate, also known as ECI to locals. Jon was also a drummer in his friend's rock band. He was known to constantly carry around drumsticks, drumming on whatever he could. And being the 80s, he was in love with rock music, the kind where people passed joints at the concerts at Maple Leaf Gardens. Jon also spent all of his money adding to his vinyl records collection. After graduating university in 1991, Jon took on a job teaching English in Thailand. And he told his sister that Thai was like a hidden language to him, one that he didn't even realize that he knew. He said that when he landed there in 1991, he just started speaking Thai. And due to his love of rock climbing, the students would end up calling him Mountain Man. Back in Ontario, Jon was an avid hiker of the Bruce Trail and liked to rock climb. He also moored a boat in Meaford, Ontario. A very interesting fact that I learned is that when Jon was in Australia this one time visiting one of his sisters who was training for the Olympics in windsurfing, he attended a show at Australia Zoo's reptile park. It was during that visit that Steve Irwin would dangle his baby while feeding a 13-foot crocodile a piece of chicken. And once his sisters moved to Hawaii, he often visited a couple times a year. He would also take at least one big trip a year. Some of his favorite places being Thailand, Kenya, Australia, El Camino, as well as Joshua Tree. He would plan those trips for an entire year, and he studied the art, the architecture, the language, and he shared all of those details with his family before and after he went on these trips. He wasn't just going around to, lounge on beaches in different countries. He actually wanted to, become one of the citizens there in a way of learning their language, learning about their art and their community. When the children were in their early 20s, their father would sadly pass away, and Jon stepped up as the family's empathetic patriarch. Jon would live with his mother in Toronto until around 2012, when she finally retired to the family's summer home in Meaford, Ontario, a municipality in Grey County, Ontario, located on Nottawasaga Bay, a sub-basin of Georgian Bay and Owen Sound Bay. Jon followed her to the small town where he took care of her as well as the home, and he worked remotely off of his laptop, building website cards for people, but he would also often travel back to Toronto and pick up temporary painting jobs as well as landscaping jobs. As I said, both of his sisters moved to Hawaii, so it was just Jon and his mother in Canada. Over the years, Jon had also gained multiple university and college degrees, where he studied outdoor education at Parkhead University in Thunder Bay, electrical engineering at George Brown College in Toronto, and computer programming at Humber College in Toronto. He also had multiple pilot licenses, including his private PPL and multi-engine rating licenses, and had his IR, which is an instrument rating certification. This meant that he could fly at any altitude and any weather. Jon not only was a very active individual, but he was a very smart individual, as you could see. That is why when on April 26, 2013, when Jon would write a note to his mother in their home, it wasn't completely out of the ordinary. Because in this note, he said that he was going to be spending a couple of days in Toronto. He said he had gotten his GST, and if she needed any food, he got paid Tuesday. He then wrote a password for his bank card down, placed his bank card with the note, and then head out the door. But it's unknown if he ever made it to Toronto. Due to his care for the environment, Jon would often take the Greyhound between Meaford and Toronto, which stopped at 610 Bay Street at the intersection of Bay and Edward. This location is just north of the Eaton Centre and west of Ryerson University. It's actually a Greyhound station that I'm very familiar with. I've taken Greyhounds to and from this station many, many times pre-COVID, when the station was actually properly functional and had buses going to the US. I would always do my trips to the US from there. But after writing that note and leaving home, Jon would never be heard from again. And what's even stranger about this is that he didn't take anything out of the ordinary. He even left his bank card behind so that his mom could buy some groceries if she needed. He also didn't take his laptop. That was left behind. He didn't take anything that suggested he was going to have a certain destination, such as going rock climbing or hiking, or that he was going to be away from home for a long period of time, like, a large amount of clothing or his laptop so that he could work. In the weeks after Jon's disappearance, his sister Judy realized she hadn't heard from him in a while. And when she spoke to her mother and asked about Jon, she didn't get a straight answer. They didn't realize at the time that Noreen was in the early stages of dementia, so it seems like she possibly didn't remember when she had last seen Jon or spoke to him. Judy attempted to contact the Toronto police from Hawaii, however, it was very frustrating because it seemed like nothing was being done and she needed someone in Toronto to advocate for her. So Judy would end up contacting a very dear family friend and former neighbor named Joan Cannings, who would end up going to Toronto Police Service's 22 Division numerous times on his sister's behalf to report him missing. But every single time she was dismissed because Jon was an adult and he has the right to be missing essentially, and they got multiple reports like this all the time, and the person just didn't want to be found essentially. Just excuse after excuse why they couldn't search for Jon. This would turn into months of family and friends attempting to report Jon missing. And they did this via phone call and going to the police station, to the point where authorities would show up at Joan's home asking her why she was so determined to report someone missing that she wasn't related to. And she insisted because it was her best friend's son and he was missing. And so authorities wanted to speak to Noreen and she got them in contact with her. And as we will learn, it took authorities a long time to actually begin investigating Jon's disappearance. Authorities would later say that there was no evidence that Jon ever even left Meaford, so it's unclear if Toronto police didn't investigate due to him not living in the city, or because, again, they were just making excuses. But it seems like there was kind of like a jurisdictional issue here that was never clarified to the family. Because Jon lived in Meaford, he needed to be reported missing in Meaford, even though they thought he was meant to be going to Toronto. They were trying to contact Toronto police. It was just a whole mess, but the family wasn't being corrected and being told, hey, because he lives there, we don't have evidence he actually made it to Toronto. You need to report him missing where he lives. That was never told to the family. So they kept going to Toronto police, begging for help, and nothing was ever happening. It's absolutely ridiculous. On top of that, Jon did have a history of a lot of traveling and going off places. However, when he did this stuff, he normally told the family. He told them about his travels, about his plans, his goals. He wouldn't have left a note for his mother saying he was going to do something, left his bank card, and left all his belongings behind, and just not come back for them. It wouldn't be until November of 2013 that the authorities would finally search the family's home, and that is when they would find his personal belongings, such as his laptop and his bank card, suggesting that he wasn't planning on being gone for long. And Jon wouldn't officially be reported missing to the Grey County OPP until December 10th of 2013, the police finally issuing a news release on December 19th, 8 months after Jon had walked out of his home and disappeared. 8 months. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely sickening to think that this has happened so often, and I completely support the authorities. I truly do. It may not seem like it from all these cases that I cover, but when there are so many of these cases where it's just so blatantly obvious that there needs to be changes, it's really hard to sit here and just say, they did everything they could. When 8 months this man was missing and nothing happened. That's 8 months for whoever did something to him to have gotten away with it, to move his body to the other side of the country, or if he had been kidnapped, to transport him somewhere, to do horrific things to him. There are so many possibilities of things that could have happened within those 8 months that no one was searching for Jon. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And as a lot of these cases that we talk about here in Canada, because authorities had no evidence of foul play or criminal activity or active suspects, there wasn't much that they could really do. They weren't able to access any of his bank accounts or request any social media records or phone records or anything like that because they had no way to get a warrant. It's wild to me. It sucks. There should be other methods that authorities are able to obtain these things when there are extenuating circumstances, such as someone being missing for 8 months. And I understand that these rules are in place to maintain privacy for the public, because what if he did just choose to go somewhere? He's an adult. He decided to go to Thailand for 8 months, say, and now all of a sudden authorities are hacking into his bank records and his private information. I see why the rules are there. However, when the family is begging you and saying, hey, this person hasn't been seen in 8 months, they left behind all their belongings, there is absolutely no activity from them, you think that they could at least pry a little bit, look a little bit, and then, if they do find that the person is fine, be like, sorry, we contacted them, we did a welfare check of sorts, they just don't want to be contacted. That's completely fine. And I understand there's probably families out there, there are stalkers, there are abusive family members, relationships, partners. Why these rules are in place? Because these things can be abused by certain people. Say, a wife fled her abusive husband, and now the husband's saying, oh, she's missing, but really she is across the world trying to get away from him. And now authorities are hacking into her stuff and finding where she is and telling him that she's, at this location. That's not right. I understand that the rules, again, are in place for a reason. Then we have cases like this where it's been over a decade where this individual is missing still and nothing happened for months and months and months. There has to be a middle ground. There really does. There has to be some kind of change. And on top of all of that, when so much time does pass, when authorities aren't looking for this information, that stuff can be lost. Information can be erased. Footage can be written over. And then evidence is lost. Evidence that could solve cases like this. In 2014, an investigation by the Fifth Estate would find that despite the fact that Jon had been missing for more than a year, authorities hadn't added his name or his DNA to the National Missing Persons Database maintained by the RCMP. It wouldn't be until 2021, 8 years after Jon was last seen alive, that the OPP would agree to assign detectives from the Criminal Investigation Branch to review Jon's case. And this decision would only come after a retired court appeal judge named Gloria Epstein would intervene and send a letter to the OPP and the Toronto Police Service asking that they consider and respond to Jon's sister's concerns. Jon's case is one of many in Ontario where critics think that the authorities didn't do enough, and I completely agree. It shouldn't be up to the family to investigate a missing loved one's disappearance. It shouldn't be up to the family to have to obtain, text messages and call logs and social media accounts and hack into them themselves to figure out where their loved one is. That is something that actually has happened quite recently in the Autumn Shaganash case. The family had to gather all that information themselves. They had to go to the lengths to get that information because the authorities weren't able to, because again, there was no reason and no legal right one way or another for them to get search warrants to gain that information. So if the family hadn't have done that, who knows if the case would be as advanced as it is now. And we have the same issue here. Although in 2013, social media wasn't as prevalent as it is now over a decade later. Now, all of this movement finally started to happen in Jon's case after Judge Epstein led a civilian review after serial killer Bruce McArthur was caught. And that revealed some serious flaws regarding the Toronto police and their missing persons investigations, including unnecessary amounts of secrecy and undermining public interest. I have covered Bruce McArthur's case very early on when I started this channel, and that is not the only case where you've seen the Toronto police fail majorly. The Barbie and Ken killers also is another major viral case where if you look at it, you see that the authorities here in Toronto failed quite immensely when it comes to catching a serial killer or serial killers. I talk about the Bruce McArthur case quite a lot on this channel and bring it up quite often because it's just astounds me that authorities looked at this man and just said, he's a nice guy. He couldn't be doing anything like that. And he had crossed paths with the police multiple times before he was finally arrested. And they just kept letting him go. If that doesn't say something about our police force here, I don't know what does. And then you see cases like Jon's where the authorities around that same time that this was happening with Bruce McArthur, because Jon went missing in the middle or around the time when Bruce McArthur was active. So that was the same police force. There's a lot of issues there. There's a lot of issues with that police force because that's two major cases now in that same little time period where they really majorly screwed up. How many more could they have screwed up in that time period? And I'm hoping over a decade later now, they have taken these screw ups and they've improved the police force because that's too many in that short period of time. And then again, with, Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, that whole situation decades earlier, it doesn't look good. It definitely doesn't look good. Judy would spend over a decade pushing for authorities to take her brother's disappearance seriously. And she would be in contact with Judge Epstein saying, quote, she said that my story that I shared with her about my brother, it really helped her to understand the changes that need to be made in the system. And so she asked me if she could write a letter on my behalf to the police to sort of put fresh eyes on the case and just bring attention to what went wrong. End quote. It would also be 9 years of asking authorities before they finally would run Jon's DNA through the US's missing persons and unidentified human remains database. Now, in present time, authorities would address the mishandling of Jon's case, saying that the initial contact from the Riley's family friend, Joan, should have been responded differently by the Toronto police. They are admitting that they screwed up, although it is a little bit too late. They admit that an officer should have gathered basic information about the case and initiated contact with the police service of the jurisdiction on behalf of the friend. Again, because they kept going to Toronto to report him missing, but then weren't doing anything because they're like, well, he isn't here. I don't know. You should be reported in Meaford, but we're not telling you to report him missing in Meaford. Authorities should have went ahead and done that themselves. Yeah, I don't know if it was laziness. I don't know if it was being overworked. It didn't happen. Authorities say that this all should have actually happened, and it's not only important because the initial hours and days surrounding a disappearance are imperative to finding someone, but as time passes, memories can fade and people can pass away that have information. Surveillance footage can also be erased or written over. And you also risk the potential perpetrators being able to harm others or escape. And that's a risk to the public. Now, when it comes to the DNA issue, according to authorities, although it says that the DNA program that they had started in the year 2000, they didn't actually start adding missing persons DNA to the database until around 2018. But apparently that just wasn't communicated to Jon's family. Although, why do I feel like 2018 is just too recently to have just been beginning to add DNA of missing persons to a database? I feel like that's something that should have happened decades ago. I feel like the US has probably been doing it for a lot longer. And it just makes me feel like Canada is sometimes really behind with stuff like that. 2018 was only, 8 years ago? That is nothing. Considering they've had the database for 18 years at that point, you'd think they would have done something like that would have been like a first thought. It's something that's extremely important. So the fact that they claim they only started doing it in 2018, again, I don't know if it's just resource issue or just lack of planning. I don't know. It just seems like that was a really bad choice. It would later be stated that Jon enjoyed hiking in the area of the Bruce Trail and typically would bring along a backpack, such as a green one pictured in this photo. According to the family, he wouldn't go anywhere without his backpack, as you can see by the many photos of him with his backpack on him. This backpack that he always carried was actually a mountain equipment co-op model MEC Flux 23 in the color cinnamon carbon. He also always wore a baseball cap, as you can see by the many pictures. Detective Inspector Jennifer Patton saying, quote, "We're asking the public to think back and reflect on the Meaford area as to whether they know something or if they remember Mr. Riley. Just bring their mind back to that time. Or if you're in the Bruce Trail area, we know Mr. Riley was a hiker and enjoyed the outdoors. And we know he frequently carried a backpack. And we know sometimes when you're out hiking, sometimes people locate things. We're asking people to think back. Do they remember finding anything?" End quote. As of 2025, there seems to have been some reform in the Toronto Police Department because they finally have a protocol for making missing persons reports. As the website states, quote, "As soon as you can't find someone and are concerned about their safety, report them missing." End quote. But sadly, that's over a decade too late for this family, that they're finally taking missing persons reports seriously, which again, should have been something done a long time ago. When it comes to what could have happened to Jon, there isn't a ton of information to truly go off of. All we truly know is that he wrote that note and left with the goal of heading to Toronto. We don't know if something happened to him before he even made it to the Greyhound station, maybe during his trip between, or once he did get to the city. But there are some more interesting facts and theories that we do need to speak about. We do know at one point that Jon had spent some time trying to expose a former teacher from his high school who he claimed was a sexual predator. It's alleged that one of them is in the Etobicoke or ECI Hall of Fame, and that the auditorium is actually named after one of these predators, which is very scary to me because I grew up not very far from this high school. I actually attended a high school very close by, and ECI was actually our rival school, and I never knew anything about any of this. There's actually tons of news articles regarding these allegations against this teacher, as well as apparently another teacher. Judy claimed that during high school, the music teacher at the school befriended Jon, who later told his sister that he'd showed up at the music teacher's home where he was essayed. Years later, with the support of his sister, Jon would take to Facebook in an attempt to expose this teacher. One post reading, quote, "My name is Jon Riley. I went to Redacted in 1981. In grade 10, a music teacher, Redacted, essayed me in his home. I heard stories of another music teacher named Redacted doing the same thing. If you have heard anyone else that was assaulted by either of these teachers, please contact the Toronto Police, which are investigating Redacted. Also, I am suing Redacted for damages and need other victims to come forward to help my case. A victim or someone with information and confidence, you can email my lawyer. The victims can go by a redacted name and be represented by my lawyer at no cost and submit a claim too." End quote. And it said that multiple victims actually did come forward. And due to this, the teacher ended up being arrested and charged with indecent assault in 2008. However, for unknown reasons, those charges were withdrawn a year later. And by 2010, that teacher would resign. Now, this is something that Jon's sister is still advocating about till this day, that this happened to her brother. He was essayed at school by a teacher, and she, to this day, is still trying to get justice for him. Now, I'm not directly saying this teacher's name because from what I've seen, there has been some lawsuits possibly regarding people exposing him, like defamation and stuff like that. So I'm usually all for just naming names, but you can find his name out there very easily if you just, go to newspapers.com. It's all over there. It is technically public information, but I'll say now, the charges were dropped. But I want to believe the victims. Why would Jon just make this up? Why would out of nowhere he just make up that he was essayed by a teacher in school? It doesn't make sense to me. And then multiple other students come forward? I would want to lean towards believing the victims. Why the charges were dropped? I mean, hey, you see our justice system and you see the way that it works here. I'm honestly not surprised, which is very unfortunate. Now, one of the most prevalent theories is regarding Jon being a victim of Bruce McArthur, because Jon did go missing within the time frame that Bruce was operating in Toronto.
As you know, on January the 18th, Bruce McArthur was arrested. He has been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder in relation to the deaths of Salim Essen, Andrew Kinsman, Sarush Mahmoodi, Dean Lissawick, Majid Kaihan, Skanda Navaratnam, and Abdul Basir Faizi. One of the focuses of the investigation has been on human remains found within planters from Mallory Crescent. I have previously stated that the remains of at least 7 individuals have been located within these planters.
Multiple men had disappeared in this time frame, and authorities weren't taking their disappearances seriously. And it turns out that Bruce was hunting these men in the gay village and killing them. Sometimes he also was luring them in because he turned out to actually be a landscaper. He had his own business, landscaping. And what's even more concerning about that is that Jon would often take up landscaping jobs that were often posted in places like the Greyhound station. So is it possible during, one of his trips, Jon's seen maybe an ad that Bruce MacArthur had put up, or possibly someone else that lured him in with a job listing? I can see that being a possibility. Bruce was able to operate without anyone bothering him for years. And although authorities found many bodies that he was actually hiding some in planters on this one property, they even caught him with a victim tied to his bed. His next victim, they saved him. It makes me wonder if Bruce was operating a lot longer than anyone knows. And it makes me wonder if there are other victims out there that they just didn't find. Could Jon have been one of his victims? And there may be some weight behind that. Not only because some of the dots connect, because, Bruce did landscaping, Jon did landscaping. Some of Bruce's victims, were regarding the landscaping. It would turn out that a person would end up contacting Jon's sister, claiming that they witnessed her brother sitting in a coffee shop talking to Bruce MacArthur, and they were discussing work. Now, I'm not sure if police ever vetted this witness and determined if this was true or not, and if it happened, if this witness could have been there at that time, just, confirmed the details to make sure this person wasn't making it up. I don't know. I mean, again, with the way this investigation has gone, you would truly hope so. But if what this witness is saying is true, that's extremely concerning. All authorities have said is that they don't have any evidence to prove that Bruce killed Jon. But that makes me question, have they been able to prove an alibi for Bruce during the time that Jon disappeared? Was Bruce, somewhere hours away during that day or so where Jon went missing, where he couldn't have been involved? Or do they not have that evidence at all? Did they ever look into that? Are they ever able to prove anything like that? I don't think so at this point in time. Or maybe they do and they just don't have that information out there. That is something I'm curious about. Because if Bruce doesn't have an alibi for that, I'd be very concerned that Jon could be one of his victims. It makes me think that it could be a possibility. Or at the same time, it makes me question, was he going to Toronto for work? And if he wasn't, was he going to meet up with someone, maybe a friend there? Could someone have lured him to Toronto for nefarious means? If it wasn't Bruce, could it have been someone else? And honestly, placing a job ad is a good way to do that. I've covered another case that happened in the GTA as well, where a father was going to buy a new truck and he was going to go test drive a truck. And instead, he was lured in by that ad and murdered. It happens and it's very scary. There is one other incident that I think is worth talking about, where Noreen told her friend Joan that a group of people had provoked Jon at a local Tim Hortons and suggested that he not go back there. So it does make me question as well, could something have happened to him along the way where, I don't know, someone just didn't like him for some reason and did something to him? But let's take one more good look at Jon. Jon is described as standing 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighing around 220 pounds, with short blonde hair that was graying and brown eyes. It's unknown what he was last wearing, but he was often known to wear blue jeans and a baseball cap. It has been over a decade and Jon's family is still without answers, and Jon still does not have any justice. What happened to this man? It's clear to everyone that he is not just relaxing on some beach somewhere across the world. He left with a plan that day to go to Toronto, and he just simply vanished. He didn't bring supplies to go hiking or on a vacation or on a staycation. Again, he left his bank card and his laptop. He was going to be coming back home. I definitely recommend you watch Jon's episode on the TV show Never Seen Again. It's very informative. You can see the family speak about him. It's very moving. I'll have that link down below. If you're also able to go support his family on a Facebook page that is set up, I'll have that link down below as well. Please go show them support. And if you have any answers or information regarding Jon's disappearance, please speak up. Please help this family get answers. I'll have the information for the authorities down below. Jon deserves justice and he deserves to be found. Jon was a man who had such an interesting life. He's a person that you would just love to sit down and speak to about all of his adventures and his upbringing in Thailand and in England and the travels that his parents had with him and his siblings. He was a very interesting person. He was very adventurous. He was always on the move, always doing something. And he was living at home with his mom, taking care of her in the home. And he was possibly going to, do some more work to make some more money for him and his mother. But then something happened. What that was, I would like to know, his family would like to know. If you have those answers, please speak up. I'll be in the comment section speaking with you all about this case. Let me know how you feel. And as always, my heart goes out to this family. Please stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.